Stop it! Stop it! S-T-O-P, new word, 19. Stop it! Well, then stop it, stop it, stop it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the new music podcast here on, podcast world, I suppose. 3 is the magic number, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Fraser Gartshore. I'm a middle-aged man, and I play the organ.
And my name is Aaron Shows. I am not quite middle-aged yet, but I also play the organ.
And I'm Jerry Martin, another middle-aged man, and I play the organ.
Oh my God, it's 3 sort of middle-aged men who play the organs.
I do play with organs sometimes.
Do you?
Now.
What does that mean, Jerry? Hold on. I think we should introduce ourselves, don't you? Let's start with the youngest in the group. Who's the youngest? That's Mr. Shows, isn't it?
It is me. Yes, it is. Oh my goodness. Yes, I am Aaron Shows. I live in Los Angeles, California. I'm an organist. I'm also a composer. I'm also a pianist. I'm also many things. Let's see. I began as a pianist. I was at age 5, began taking lessons and had that for 9 years, and then began taking some organ lessons in high school, and then followed that through to college and did my first 4 years, my undergraduate degree in church music in organ. And I finished that degree, and then that was my regular job. And then I went to grad school and pursued film music, which was actually a passion of mine since I was a little kid. So the first movie that I saw that I remember vividly wanting to get into film music was Back to the Future, 1980s Alan Silvestri film, Bob Zemeckis. And that film sort of hit me as, oh, music is a cool thing that happens in the background of films. And you can sort of subtly manipulate emotions with people not even knowing how you're doing it. But anyway, that was my passion, but I had to have a real job first. So I was accompanying choirs, I playing the organ in churches, and all kinds of gigging. Then decided, well, with film music, I needed to move to LA. This is where all the filming stuff is happening. So that's what happened. After grad school, I sort of waited a few years and saved some money and moved to LA. And within 6 months, all that money was gone. So, gigging and finding work and networking and all that stuff. But basically, how I am where I am today is kind of just a mystery to me. It's all networking, but you never really apply for a job and get a job. It's always you talk to people and just live life normally, and then someone thinks of you for something, and then you get a gig. And that's how music works. But I mean, I do play out here a lot of session work as an organist and pianist. Session work is basically when a composer writes a score for a film, and they want to hire musicians to play that score and record it. And so they call people like me if they want organ, and I show up at a recording studio and I sight read music, and they hit record. And it's a very unique thing. You know, it's mainly, I think, there's certain cities around the globe that do that now, but it's unique, obviously, beginning here in LA for film stuff. That was kind of a cool side job that I don't think many organists have. I'm also a composer, so there is that. My graduate school work was in film music composition, so I have been writing since I was a kid as well. And I've done many, many things, many feature films, many short films, as well as many concert works for the organ that are published. So it's sort of trying to make a career of half playing and half composing. And that's kind of where I am today in a nutshell. So that's me. Any other questions?
Yes, definitely. You keep talking about LA and Hollywood and all these exciting things, but you're not from there. So where do you hail from? And more importantly, where did you sort of move to in between to do all these exciting studies?
Oh gosh, I have lived many places. So you may not detect it because it's not too much in my accent, my American accent. But if I were talking like this to y'all, you would make more sense. But I'm from Alabama.
Can I just interrupt to inform listeners that I can actually see Aaron. We're doing this via video call, and right behind his head there's a banjo. Now, if that doesn't give the game away, I don't know what would.
That gives it away. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. Yes, I am from Alabama. I was a late 80s child, and I lived there for 14 years. Then we moved when I was midway through high school. So all my piano background, improvisation, all the things that I began with was in the capital, Montgomery, Alabama. We moved from there to West Virginia, another banjo state. and if you get what I mean there, but no, it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful state. So I finished high school there, and then did my first 2 years of undergrad in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at Duquesne University, studying the organ there with Anne Lebowski, who was a student of Langlais. And then I transferred schools halfway through undergrad to Virginia, to Shenandoah Conservatory, where I finished my organ degree. From there, moved to North Carolina, to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I went to UNC School of the Arts for grad school. And I graduated from there in 2013. So that's 11 years ago. So I've lived up and down the East Coast. Then after that, waited another 5 years or so. 3 years, I guess it is. 13, I moved to LA in 2016, and I drove across the country, took 5 days, and that's where I ended up where I am now. So it's been a journey, to say the least.
Go west. Yeah.
Yes, go west. And everybody else, my family is still on the East Coast. So I ran away, basically.
Good for you. Good for you. If I can maybe sort of interject a little bit there,
Sure.
all of that you said is basically the same for me, apart from the film music bit and the locations. But I started playing piano when I was very, very young as well. I'm not sure exactly when the organ thing started. We actually had at home. I'm from Inverness in the north of Scotland originally, and at home we had one of those Yamaha electric organs. Remember them?
Oh, yes.
Yamaha Electone or whatever it was called. We had one of those things, and I sort of pottered around on this thing, playing sort of popular and slightly jazzy music. I had a great Uncle George. He was the jazz musician in the family, and he sort of taught me some of the jazzy tricks. And at some point, I'm not sure if it was my music teacher at school or maybe even my piano teacher or someone in the family, they said, you should probably start taking proper organ lessons. I went and introduced myself to the organist at the cathedral in Inverness, and he took me on and taught me the basics of classical organ. And at the same time, I basically taught him the basics of popular and jazzy organ, because I always loved the theatre organ. That was always my big thing. There was an old radio show on BBC Radio called The Organist Entertains. I think, Jerry, we have that in common, don't we?
Yes, indeed.
And that got me into the world of theatre organs and things like that. So when I went off to university, I studied in Edinburgh. I studied music in Edinburgh. And again, the church music side of things was quite a large part of my studies. That got me slightly closer to a few theatre organ instruments, but it also got me closer to another kind of music. I got into the world of not only jazz and blues, but I got into the world of sort of pop and rock and other kinds of things as well. And I spent the 90s traveling around the UK playing fairly secretively with all sorts of interesting people in all sorts of interesting scenarios. You can hear me on a lot of recordings, but nobody knows it is me. And one day I'll probably, one day the contracts will run out and I'll be able to say what it was and who I was pretending to be. But those were fun times. Yeah, you've got your film music over in LA. So I had my fun music in the 90s.
That's kind of the same thing. I was trying to think, you were saying it's the film music, but also with that side of the world, you're playing on recordings that no one knows who you are. I'm playing on films and no one knows who I am.
Thinking that.
Yeah,
it's the same. It's
Yes.
the exact
we are
same.
we are the secret musicians. That's right. Exactly.
Yes.
And then in the year 2000, I decided to leave bonnie Scotland and come and live in Germany. And I've been here ever since. So this is my 25th year in Germany now. Since I've been here, I've been a jazz musician, a pop and rock musician, I've been a blues musician, but mainly I have been a church musician. So that means organist. I've been conducting choirs. I conducted a couple of orchestras in the interim as well, but it's back down to choirs now and playing organs around the place. And I then started that amazing thing that actually brought the three of us together. I started a YouTube channel presenting the organ. And then this strange pandemic thing arrived. And that's when the three of us kind of got to know each other. Over to Dr. Martin.
Indeed. All thanks to Hauptwerk and the madness of technology and all of that wonderful stuff. So, well, I guess maybe I'm a little bit the odd one out in that music is not my day job. So I am a surgeon in Southern Ohio, in Portsmouth. So not far, I can actually see West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky. So also banjo states. So we have that in common with Aaron. And that's why I need to add a banjo to the collection.
No, you don't.
So anyhow, but I hail from Ireland. I grew up in the west coast of Ireland, not far from Galway City. And although neither of my parents played music, there was a lot of music on both sides of the family going back. So I started my musical journey in the traditional Irish world. So I was at the young age of 4 or 5 handed a quarter-size fiddle, violin, learned a little bit of Suzuki initially, but really spent probably the first 5-6 years of my musical exposure was learning traditional Irish music, fiddle, all by ear, all of that, written down letter notation and whatnot. I was singing in choirs. I loved church music and the sound of the organ, but wasn't introduced to keyboard instruments until probably age 9-10. So I was drawn to the sound of the piano and the Ceilidh band. It's like, I want to play that. So, of course, came piano lessons. And then I was introduced to classical music through the piano. So age 9-10. Secondary school or high school for me brought me to St. Finian's College in Mullingar. I spent a year there, and it was there I was introduced to the organ. That was part of their whole Schola Cantorum. And I was just completely blown away. I had, growing up in the west coast of Ireland, outside of Galway Cathedral, there really aren't a lot of pipe organs. So I had no idea what organs were or what they could do. Of course, then I was bitten by the organ bug, and the rest is history. So I spent 1 year in Mullingar, returned a little closer to home, but most of my early and advanced education in organ was with Frances Moore at the Limerick School of Music. Absolutely amazing lady who taught me everything I knew back in the early days about organ. So then we have to make a choice in Ireland right after secondary school. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? Here in the United States, folks go to college and they have some time to think. But in Ireland, you kind of choose your terminal degree. So me, it was music or medicine. And I rolled the dice in the medical world with an intention to keep music up as sort of my passion to keep me sane. And it really did. Interestingly, I do remember at the end of my first year of medical school, some of my friends in the music college invited me over to visit the pipe organ there as I would play something. And, it had really been months since I'd really practiced. And I remember sitting at the console and this horrible feeling of not being able to play anything, which is something that neither of you experience. But I didn't have my dots and I'd forgotten all my dots. And I'm sitting and looking at these keys and it's like, oh, this is awful. Now, that was motivation in my first year of medical school to get back to practicing and learning. So I doubled down, and that was just what I did with kind of all of my free time. So I did some more performance exams and learned some of the big repertoire. And my craziness at the end of medical school, my best friend in med school was a pianist. And at the time, it was before the internet, before I knew the Scott brothers existed. So we decided, wouldn't it be fun to do an organ and piano duet? And we couldn't find anything. So that turned into, all right, I'm going to transcribe Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. And as one does. So as final year med students, we performed that in Dublin's National Concert Hall. What were we thinking? To this day, we still look back. What were we thinking? So that sort of was how music was baked into part of my everyday life. And we did mention Hauptwerk, which we'll talk more about later on, but that was right when that technology was starting. And if it had not, I do not know that I would be able to play today, because I then went down the training pathway, came to the United States, and having a little keyboard and a computer at home. And then there was more keyboards, and then there's soldering irons and pedal boards and electronics projects and sawing up wood in the bathroom in your apartment, as one does. But all of that stuff allowed me to kind of keep up this, I guess I was a secret musician in a sense at that time, because I didn't know people. I was completely isolated from the musical world because I was in the medical world, and it was before internet, social media, all that took off. So every once in a while I would get to play an organ here or there, but it was really something I did by myself until the pandemic. And here we all are, and it is just absolutely fantastic. So that's kind of the headlines. I've lived in various places in the United States: Connecticut, North Carolina, Lexington, Kentucky, and now back in Scioto County, Southern Ohio.
There you are then. That is the Stop It gang. All three of us. And I'm getting the vibe here that all three of us ran away from home for some bizarre reason. We've all ended up somewhere else. Although two of you have lost your original accent, probably.
Your accent would be hard to localize. I don't know that listening to Fraser Gartshore, I'm like, oh yeah, he's from Inverness.
Oh, definitely not. No.
See? Yeah, there you go, right? So none of us can be localized by our accents.
That's true.
Damn it, we shouldn't have said anything. We shouldn't have said who
Stop it.
It could have been a big secret. So we've already got a few things that we have in common already, because there's bound to be somebody out there asking, well, who are these three guys? Why are they together? And what are they doing on the podcast world? What are they talking about? We ran away from home. We are secret musicians. We are organists. We all play other instruments. And surely we must have something else in our lives. Okay, Jerry has a real job. Don't you hate it, Aaron, when someone says, oh, you're a musician? What's your real job?
What's your real job? Yes.
That is just cruel.
That's actually a very LA thing. There's LA loves the humor of making a compliment followed by a passive insult. And so it's that shirt looks great on you. Does it come in your size? That kind of thing. So
you have a beautiful face, perfect for radio.
Yes, you look great for 75. You're 30. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So why are we here? This is a good question.
Why are we here? Well, we had this idea. The three of us met up live a couple of weeks ago over here in Germany. The guys just happened to be traveling around the world, and they ended up here in this part of Germany where I now live. And we came up with the idea, well, we need to do this more often, just spend time together chatting. And then we came up with the idea, well, hold on, we're chatting about the same kind of things all the time. Wouldn't it be interesting if we recorded this and shared it with the wider world? Yes, we are all organists. Yes, we all play the organ. But no, we're very different to your average organist. And now it's time to find out why. Who wants to say it? I don't.
Yeah. But isn't it so true? I mean, all of us have so we love the organ. We love what it can do. But all of us have a very different perspective on the organ world compared to the kind of one thinks about it like a mainstream academic. I am going to be an organist, and these are the things I do. Like I think about in the musical world, there's very much a stair step of things that one does to get to where one is. None of us have done those traditional things in the organ world, I think, and our approach to music is the same. But we very much love it, and we want lots of other people to love it. So that's why we're here.
Yeah. Shall we go chronological on this? There's a sort of a pattern between the three of us.
I was just going to say that I think I don't know how it was for you all, but during all of my training in college and even before all that, you were sort of taught all these rules, and I think that's kind of important in any kind of creative endeavor. You sort of have to learn all of the ground rules in order to have freedom, but we were all sort of taught that this is the way things are supposed to be. And the whole time I was being taught that, I remember thinking like, why do I have to do it this way? Why is it that, and so you're questioning this stuff the whole time. And I think that's kind of, once I got out of college and finally was free, of the academic system, it's like, well, you can do what you want now. And no one can tell you not to stop doing that. I guess they can say stop it, but you're an adult. You can do the things you want to do. So it was kind of just the freedom of learning all the rules, but then learning that they actually don't apply. You can do what you want in music, and that's kind of part of why we're here. I guess it's sort of just breaking from the rules a little bit that we're all taught to us. But
we're gonna cover those rules in a future episode.
Sure.
We're not going to go down that road today. We're going to make ourselves very unpopular if we do. I think we will save that one for the future.
Point.
But that is the whole point. But it's a kind of I remember when I was studying, I think I was very lucky when I studied, because all of my tutors or professors or academics when I studied music, they were all very, very, very open-minded. There was no this is the way it has to be done. They were very academic about a lot of things. They said this is how it used to be done, and this is how it was done in those days, and Mozart did it this way, and then Beethoven did it this way, but then came Schumann and did it this way. I know there was Schubert in between who just did his own thing, and nobody bothered with anything of that. And it was all sort of very much, everyone has come along and done their own thing, and we were kind of encouraged to try and find our own thing, which a lot of that doesn't exist anymore in the academic world. It's a lot of this is the way it shall be done, and I'm telling you that because that's the way I had to do it too, and I'm miserable, so I'm going to make you miserable too. That just seems to be the way things are going, which is a terrible shame.
And it's why you don't see a lot of players improvising anymore. And it's the same kind of thing. It's sort of you're taught the notes, and this is the way you have to play what's on the page. And any person that plays the notes realizes that those notes were created by someone who was improvising. Right. Someone was making this up. And so you have to be able to do it yourself to take it to the next level. But I think definitely this podcast is sort of an expression of we've all learned the rules, and this is the freedom part. This is where we get to be creative. Any kind of discipline, whether it's learning an instrument, whether it's learning a language, you have to learn the rules first, and then you can speak your sentences and speak your words the way that you want to do it. And I think this is kind of where we are right now, I think. Would you agree?
I agree with everything so far, very much so. Let's do the chronological thing. Jerry, your sort of deep love of organ music is a very strange one, if I may say so myself.
Very strange.
No, I'm going to say strange because any real, shall we say real organist out there, we'll cover them in a future episode as well. We have a name for those people, by the way, but we're not going to tell you what it is today. You'll have to tune in the future to find out.
Yes.
It's a secret, exactly. No, but those people, when they hear the kind of music we play, they tend to sort of, I don't know, their feathers get ruffled, or they get sort of worried, anxious, or they just scoff at us, even worse, and things like that. And chronologically speaking, Jerry actually plays a lot of music from a certain period in history that has sadly been, for no reason other than it wasn't written by Bach, been forgotten.
Right, absolutely. And so I guess going back to my history of organ, I mentioned the Rachmaninoff transcription. So I have always been obsessed with the colors of the organ and what it can do sonically. Yet I was growing up and learning organ, since I didn't know this term until I came to the States, but the Orgelbewegung moment, when we had all of these organs. You had the French symphonic style where the organ was becoming an orchestra, English organ building. Yet for some reason, in the middle of the last century, there was this return to organs must sound a certain way and music must be played a certain way with pointy toes and so on and so forth. And it was, as organs were ripped out. We had all of these wonderful symphonic instruments that went away. But likewise, the music that was written for those instruments got buried. So I stumbled across a CD of transcriptions early on in my med school years, was blown away, became obsessed. But realized that at the time, transcriptions were very much frowned upon because that's not organ music. So I was very much drawn to that world. And so I did one myself. But then during pandemic time, I discovered this whole wealth of music written by composers before the First World War. And it is just, it would have been the popular music of the time. They, especially in England, they had the town hall organs, or here in the United States, cities may not have had a symphony orchestra yet. So somebody like Lemaire would show up and he would play Beethoven's symphony on the organ for them. So there are these vast treasure troves of music that was written in that veil. So that is my interest, is music of that era. And interestingly, I do think we're at a point in history now that we are ready. We, the mainstream academia, but also people in general, are ready to appreciate this music again. I have been taking a deep dive into the works of Stanford, who is considered mainstream, but his keyboard works are not. They're very neglected. And I came across a wonderful quote last night from one of his biographers that said part of the reason he was not accepted was that he was too English for the Irish, too Irish for the English, and too German for all of them. But likewise, he was very much a fan of how the organ can be so colorful and, a good tune and good harmony. So that's what I'm all about, is digging up music of kind of the Victorian, early Edwardian period, and there is so much of it, and it's just wonderful. So that's me.
It's absolutely wonderful, isn't it? Well, like you, I was definitely into that kind of music for a very, very long time. It's wonderful music. So you've got Stanford.
Yeah.
You mentioned Stanford.
Lemaire, Hollins.
Alfred Hollins. You mentioned Lemaire, the performer, or the guy who wrote all these wonderful transcriptions. But not only the transcriptions, there was a lot of organ music being written around this time, specifically for the organ. And again, these composers have been forgotten, long forgotten as well. After that period, I think this is where I come in, because I because of maybe it's the theatre organ connection, or maybe it's the jazz music connection. When I learned to play a bit of jazz piano, again, this was my great Uncle George that taught me all of these things. He was a massive fan of Fats Waller, the wonderful jazz pianist from the 20s and 30s from Harlem. And Uncle George taught me to play this amazing style of piano called stride piano. And one day I learned that Fats Waller wasn't just a piano player, he was also a pretty good organist too. He actually started out, believe it or not, as an organist. And he would play these jazzy tunes on the organ. And of course, my ears just lit up when I heard that. And I said, I'm not going to do it in the piano. It's too difficult in the piano. My left hand's jumping around all over the place. I can do this in the organ. My left hand stays put and my left foot jumps up and down the pedal board, and then I'm free to do what I want with my right hand. Isn't this brilliant? This is the music for me. And to this day, that's what I enjoy playing the most. I get, when I'm playing, it can be a church organ, it could be a concert organ, it could be a theatre organ, it could be an electronic organ, it could be whatever you want, Hammond organ, anything you want, that's the kind of music I will always gravitate towards, just because it's so much fun. And again, the colors of the instrument, you could really sort of paint wonderful pictures, but you can turn the organ into maybe not just an orchestra, like in your transcriptions, but now you can turn it into a big band. So you've got your saxophones, your trumpets, your trombones, you've even got your kind of rhythm section if you know what you're doing. And you can turn the organ into a big band and get going. And of course, if you really know what you're doing, you can get people to dance along as well. Really get people to... Now, if you think about that, someone like Virgil Fox, not that long ago, would get people dancing in the aisles when he played Bach's Jig Fugue, for example, yeah? Nobody would dream of doing that these days in an organ concert, would they? At least not, well, no. They might play the piece of music, but they wouldn't dream of telling the audience to get up and dance along. That would be, that would be amazing. I think we need to recreate that kind of thing as well. But yeah, my thing, if I could spend all day playing any kind of music, that would be it. It would be sort of jazzy, swing music, bit of blues, maybe even some boogie woogie on a pipe organ anywhere in the world and get the audience fizzing. That's my kind of thing. Really get people going with that. And I think that sort of takes us almost up to the 1940s, 1950s. And I think this is where we have to hand over to Aaron.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start this kind of based off what you said there about the audience. This goes back to actually Mozart. There are letters he wrote to his father talking about how excited he was for the audience to cheer during his cadenza in some concerto he was going to be playing. Meaning, back in that time, to break out into applause or to erupt in the middle of a piece was normal. Like, he was expecting the audience to have a reaction to this moment. Whereas now it's very much you stay so quiet to the very, very end of something and then you can clap, But so I think that change is kind of like a pendulum. It's went one way and then it's kind of swinging back. But yeah, in that advent of the 50s, 60s, and then even in the 70s, we saw this thing called synthesizers. And what that was taking various... I'm trying to put this in simple terms. There's oscillators, but sound generating machines essentially, and creating new sounds based on various waveforms and various. I'm trying to how to put this. Jerry, how to describe
harmonics.
This.
Harmonics.
You're doing great.
He works with soldering things and whatnot. But what that was, technically was they were creating a version of an organ. The organ was the first synthesizer. You were taking all these different pipes, ranks, stops, and you are making your own colors out of them. And the synthesizer is doing the same thing electronically. And so it's kind of was the next, I would say, sibling to the organ in some ways.
Let's not forget, if I may interrupt you, the Hammond organ was definitely the world's first synthesizer. And what was it based on? It's based on harmonics. Simple as that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's continued to be used into recordings today. And I think that's kind of what for me was the biggest pull or the biggest draw, I should say, for the organ was that, I was able to sort of make new colors and new sounds. And I was hearing these recordings of, rock bands and pop bands of the last 60 years doing this with synthesizers and thinking, well, this is what the organ does. It does the same thing. Why can't the organ do that? And so it can. And so, but there was just nobody doing that. And so I think it's been this sort of discovery, this exploration into trying out music of the last 60 years that's not part of the quote unquote, classical or concert realm, but more of the music, like Fraser, you're saying, the music that gets audiences dancing. And that's kind of what rock and roll was all about. And the same thing with big band jazz. It was to get the audience dancing and moving around. The organ has kind of, in general, found a way, to be in churches only or in concert halls only. And it, as you have said before, it was an instrument for entertainment from the very beginning. And we can get into the history of all that later. But pop music, rock music, jazz, from all that stuff, that was entertaining music for the masses. And having the organ continue that, I think just seems natural, but nobody was doing it. And so that's kind of where I found my little niche of trying to figure out how to play popular music from the last 60 years of rock and roll and jazz and all kinds of stuff, electronic stuff. And anyway, it's been kind of a new territory completely because it's not really being done at all. It's sort of, I think, is the next step is for me, for film music, that's another one of those genres of music that I think is becoming more and more accepted as quote unquote real music. 10, 20 years ago, you would see very few concerts of film music being performed. And now it's very commonplace to see the orchestras doing film music concerts. And in the same way, I think it just takes that exposure to the audiences to see that the organ can do these things too. These are real genres of music. They're living genres of music. They're being made new all the time. That's the way to keep all this stuff alive. And so that's kind of where my interests lie is trying to translate music that the people of the world are all dancing to or all enjoying and showing that the organ is part of that. It's one, I mean, you see people do it on piano, you see people do it on violin. Right. Look at YouTube. Everyone's playing pop music on all these other instruments except for the organ. And so it's like, why can't it be part of that too? It certainly can. And that's kind of where I'm taking this is just sort of this new path of trying out how to get the organ to fit into this world. And it certainly does fit very, very easily. And it just takes someone who can be brave enough to do this. I think that's been my kind of calling, I think, at least, showing people online on YouTube and also in concerts. It's always kind of gets mixed reviews because there's both kinds of crowds out there. But I think that anything new like that is going to have that kind of reaction. I think it takes, and same thing with film music. It just takes the people to become acclimated and familiar with it to really accept it. And I think it's wanted. I think it's actually a really cool thing. So
I think it's definitely wanted. And I think it's, one of the coolest things you mentioned your stream. It's very cool. At least once per stream, you'll say something like, I've never tried this on the organ before. The subtext to that is nobody has ever tried this on the organ before. Tried this. And then you play it, and then your editor's like, that actually worked really well.
It worked really well. Yeah.
And that's it. That, like you say, anything will, because the organ is capable of making almost any sound, any kind of music will therefore work on it. You said a second ago, oh, this is a new thing. It's not a new thing. This is right throughout the history of the organ. It's always been the instrument that was there to try out all these new things. I think in the last, let's say in the last 80 years, maybe this takes us back to Jerry's historical movement here, the Orgelbewegung. Maybe it's only in the last sort of, shall we say, 80, 70, 60 years that the organ has once again become this very confined, weird instrument. It does have a strange image in the world. What's your view of the image of the organ? And not the image of the organ to organists, but the image of the organ to the general public or the music listening public.
I can say, at least from the film side of things, and this also applies to the sessions that I play for movies and things, this is kind of the natural, it's the natural way of things. It's funny because in film music, you're trying to find stereotypes because that's what audiences we have these conditioned stereotypes in our mind of musical stereotypes, that when you see a cafe in France, you want to hear the accordion playing, or when you see a boat on a canal in Venice, you want to hear the mandolins. There's these stereotypes that you kind of associate with these places. And I think...
Are you going to say scary in a minute? Are you going to say something scary?
Yes. Yeah. Is that people, I think, in the general public have always seen the organ as loud, scary, cathedral, dark music, at least in the film world. If you ask anybody on the street, what used to be, what was that? Jay Leno used to do this on his Tonight Show, jaywalking. What does a pipe organ sound like? Everyone would say loud and scary. Everybody will say that. That's just what the audience would say.
Absolutely.
And the three of us know very well that the organ can do that, yes, but it can do the exact 180 of that as well. It can be super, super quiet, and no one knows that. Everyone, the general public outside of the organ world thinks organ is big, loud, and it's that stereotype, and it can do that, but yeah, that's kind of my thinking, is that the public thinks the organ is big, scary, and loud. I don't know about you all.
No, I agree 100%. And, we actually have a annual event here in Portsmouth. We call it Pipe Screams.
Yes.
Where we play all the stuff that, folks don't normally think about with the organ. And that is exactly what people think coming to that. They actually come for the big, loud, and scary, but usually leave with, I didn't know the organ could do that, all the other stuff that they get to hear. So yes, that is definitely the image that the public has. And Aaron, I think you're right. Movie making is commonly about leaning into stereotypes. And maybe that's become a little bit self-fulfilling in a way, is that as kind of church styles have changed, especially here in the United States, organs are heard perhaps less in churches as a whole, I think, here in America. So because of that, the only exposure people have to organs is when there's a loud, scary organ moment in the Haunted Mansion.
Exactly.
I wonder who played that.
Yes. Who could that possibly have been? Or maybe the Addams Family, for example. That was, who could possibly have played the organ in those films?
One of the three of us is simultaneously trying to dispel stereotypes while reinforcing stereotypes. So
exactly.
It's all good. Stop it!
Stop it. Now here's the next question, and this is where things are going to get a little bit naughty. That was the image of the organ to the general outside world. What about the image of the organ to organists? Ooh, a silence.
Crickets. Fraser,
no one's going to say anything, but there we are. You got this,
I know,
ladies and gentlemen.
It's such an interesting question, isn't it?
It is, and this is exactly what we're going to be covering in one of our next
because I received a publication in the
episodes.
mail yesterday, and it generated a reaction. That basically so I guess I'll take the lead on this. Is that there's actually parallels to the medical world. Let me start by saying that I actually started in academic medicine, and now I'm in community practice, where we're still taking care of patients and all the rest. But there is in academia, there is as we kind of said at the beginning here, this is how things are supposed to be. There are rules, there are regulations that are passed down. There is a hierarchy. There is a paying of respect. There is there's a whole pecking order all the way, and so on and so forth. Certainly in the last century, it may be starting to loosen up a little bit, but I think within, whether it's non-organists or organists, but I think musicians as a whole view the organ as a very serious, very strict instrument. And, because the organist doesn't really need other instrumentalists, it is the whole orchestra. I think organists can become rather solitary individuals. And as such, the organists are over there doing their organist thing. And it can be it sort of reinforces that this is how things are supposed to be, the rules and whatnot. So I think it can become, or it has become rather, a very rule following approach. That's kind of a roundabout summary of my thoughts. But what do you guys think?
Has anyone ever come up to either of you and said, let's say you're playing something on the organ and you're having, God forbid, fun, and someone says, stop it. The organ, you're not supposed to be playing that kind of music on the organ. The organ is not there to play fun music. Have you heard that?
In so many words, yeah. I mean, there have been times. Actually, I would say this has been in times in recent years that I've been asked to play a program, a concert for something, or a piece for some program, and I will say, "Can I improvise on something?" And they'll say, "Oh, we'll find somebody else." That kind of a response. And so that tells you right there. It's like, well, if I want to do something fresh and new, and heaven forbid something fun, there's no want for that. I don't quite know how to engage with that, but that's what I've been running up against a lot. So yes, I mean, in so many words, yeah, there's people that are sort of against that, and I don't know why. maybe it's being in the church all the time, and you're supposed to be very serious in church, just like you are in a courtroom, and it's like everything's very much like by the rules. The history of this instrument is something we can get to in the future, but which is a weird sentence to say that, by the way. The history is something we get to in the future. Anyway, but
back to the future.
Back to the future. This is all circles around. But I mean, yes, it is always. Before the organ was in the church, it was an instrument of entertainment, and you think about back into the times with the very primitive organs. It was getting the crowds worked up at gladiator events. There was these huge, huge instruments that would get the crowd going. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure why there's that wall of, we'll just keep saying academia, which is what it comes from. This isn't to discredit them at all, because this is what we were all trained, and that's how we kind of got where we are today, technically speaking. But there is that wall that is sort of guarding the organ, I think, from the rest of the world, and it's a strange concept. But it really, like you're saying with the medical world, Jerry, it is. There's this kind of like whole pecking order of things, and you kind of have to you're up against that huge wall. What do you think, Fraser, as far as this goes? Fun at the organ.
Something that always gets me. I don't spend a lot of time watching organic content on YouTube, to use that adjective wrongly, but when I do, I'll sometimes see, there's a new organist performing an organ concert live in some magnificent church somewhere in the United States with 10,000 seats and 10,000 stops on the organ, and then I start the video, and then I will invariably scroll down to the description of that video and look at the program. And after about 10 seconds, I will invariably stop listening and go and look at something else. Cats, kittens, I don't know, whatever you look at on YouTube and things like that. Because it's always the same. It might not be exactly the same pieces, but it's the same kind of music in the same order, played in the same way, on the same registrations, with the same technique, and with the same absolute lack of, for want of a better word, get ready to say stop it if you want, for want of a better word, balls.
Oh, stop it, Fraser.
But I hope you know what I mean.
But it's all perfect. It is perfectly manicured, and it is meticulous, and it is technically amazing. I mean, it's a little bit like, gymnastics or other high achieving sports. It is perfection, but it leaves you cold.
Exactly. There's no aesthetic content to it. It's robotically perfect. It's almost like pressing play on a MIDI file that someone has computerized into the organ itself.
Yeah.
And as I've had the opportunity to play, anytime I pull together a program, even when I'm playing from the traditional literature, it's always about how can I make this exciting. Aaron, you talked about, hearing the crowd cheering. I mean, I would love that. And I always want people to leave, even when I'm playing, music from 100, 200 years ago. I really want to feel like they have been touched, connected with in some point. Yeah. That's my goal.
No,
they don't do that. And it also goes back to, Aaron, you said it earlier as well. There's that, please do not clap until the last note has finished sounding. Yeah. Why shouldn't you, if you're enjoying something, why shouldn't you show your appreciation? There was a wonderful complaint made recently. Some musical was taking place on a stage in London, and the audience was singing along. And the audience was singing along so loudly, it was putting the performers on stage off. Okay, if it's overdone, I'm guessing it would be quite off-putting, but it means they're having a wonderful time. They recognize the music, they're enjoying it. Do things like that happen at organ concerts? I'm quite proud to say yes. When I play an organ concert, I get people clapping in the middle of pieces, at the end of every piece. Sometimes I get a whoop. Sometimes you get these things. Not many of my colleagues do.
Yeah, there's sort of and I'll preface this by saying that that music that we're talking about that's kind of played at all the concerts in general, the traditional repertoire, we're not against that at all. Actually, I love a lot of that music, and we were raised playing that, and that's why music is all encompassing. That it's one part of music. It's not all of music, but when all the organ concerts you go to are these top 10 composers only that you ever see, there's you can kind of look at, like you said, look at those program descriptions, and there's 10 names you can write out, and it'll be from those 10 composers you can find, and you would think that when you're in the time of those composers that they weren't doing that for the top 10 of 600 years ago before that, so it's I don't know when that changed. I think it needs to change for this time, because I fear for the demise of the organ because of that, and that's what we're here, I think, to kind of keep it alive. It definitely has a life to it, and it can do all these things, and it can be new all the time. Yeah, when you see this is like 9.9999% of concerts are the same top 10 composers, and it's like, how is this possible? There's so much music out there. Why are you picking the same stuff every concert? Again, you're up against, the three of us are up against that wall of all those concerts being the same way, and we're doing something different. So you're going to get pushback, but I think that's what makes it fun for us. I think is that we're
definitely.
Yes. So that's why we're here, actually. Yes. So to stop all that.
The only reason we're here.
Just to stop it.
We have a message to the organ wall, and that message is:
Stop it.